to another History on Stamps, and this time we're going to be taking a look at President Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt has appeared on both United States stamps and stamps worldwide. Two of the stamps in this collection of mine are precanceled, and they are a joined pair. So before I begin telling you about our 26th president, let me explain a little bit about precanceled stamps. Precanceled stamps are typically used by mass mailers who can save the postal system time and effort by prearranging to use the precancels and delivering the stamped mail already for sorting. This group of stamps types are popular, and many hobbyists collect only precancels. And a lot of hobbyists create or collect pairs, such as the case in this particular stamp in my collection. The first two stamps you'll see in this presentation are a blue 5-cent piece. This was released along with the regular issues from 1922 to 1932. And then also for my collection is this red 6-cent Theodore Roosevelt stamp that was part of the regular issue from 1954 to 1963, I believe it was. But let's talk about this president, a very popular president and a very outgoing individual. Theodore Roosevelt was born October 27, 1858, and he passed on January 6, 1919. Often referred to as Teddy or TR, he was an American statesman, author, explorer, soldier, naturalist, and reformer who served as the 26th President of the United States from 1901 to 1909. A leader of the Republican Party, he was a leading force of the Progressive Era, and born a sickly child with debilitating asthma, Roosevelt embraced a strenuous lifestyle and successfully regained his health. He integrated his exuberant personality, vast range of interest, and world-famous achievements into a cowboy persona defined by robust masculinity. Homeschooled, he became a lifelong naturalist before attending Harvard College. His first of many books, The Naval War of 1812, established his reputation as both a learned historian and a popular writer. He entered politics and established his reputation as both a learned historian and a popular writer. He entered politics becoming the leader of the Reform faction of Republicans in the New York State Legislature, and following the death of his wife and mother, he escaped to the wilderness and operated a cattle ranch in the Dakotas. He returned to run unsuccessfully for mayor of New York City in 1886. He served as Assistant Secretary of the Navy under William McKinley, resigning after 1 year to serve with the Rough Riders, gaining national fame for courage during the war in Cuba. Returning a war hero, he was elected as governor of New York in 1898. A frustrated party establishment made him McKinley's running mate in the election of 1900. He campaigned vigorously across the country, helping McKinley win re-election by a landslide on a platform of peace, prosperity, and conservation. The assassination of President McKinley in September 1901 meant that the 42-year-old had become President of the United States, the youngest in history. Leading his party and country into the Progressive Era, he championed the square deal domestic policies, promising the average citizen fairness, breaking up trusts, regulation of railroads, and pure food and drugs. Making conservation a top priority, he established a myriad of new national parks, forests, and monuments in order to preserve the nation's natural resources. In foreign policy, he concentrated on Central America, where he began construction of the Panama Canal. He also greatly expanded the United States Navy and sent the Great White Fleet on a world tour to project the United States naval power. His successful efforts to end the Russian-Japanese War won him the 1906 Nobel Peace Prize. Wow, a president that really earned it instead of one that was just given because he happened to be half black and half white. Not naming any names, of course. Re-elected in 1904, he continued pursuit of progressive policies, eventually culminating in a blockage of legislative agenda in Congress. Roosevelt successfully groomed his close friend William Howard Taft for the presidency. And after leaving office, he went on a safari in Africa and toured Europe. Returning to the USA, he became frustrated with Taft's approach as his successor, trying but failing to win the nomination in 1912. He founded his own party, the Progressive Bull Moose Party, and called for wide-ranging progressive reforms, and the split allowed the Democrats to win the White House and Congress in 1912. Those Republicans aligned with Taft would control the Republican Party for decades. Frustrated at home, Roosevelt led a 2-year expedition in the Amazon, nearly dying of tropical disease. And during World War I, he opposed President Wilson for keeping the U.S. out of the war against Germany and offered his military services, which were never summoned. Although he planned to run again for president in 1920, his health quickly deteriorated and he died in early 1919. Roosevelt has consistently been ranked by scholars as one of the greatest U.S. presidents. His face adorns Mount Rushmore alongside those of Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln. And on September 6, President McKinley was shot by an anarchist acting alone while in Buffalo, New York. Initial reports suggested that his condition was improving, so Roosevelt, after visiting the ailing president, embarked for the West, and when McKinley's condition worsened, Roosevelt rushed back. McKinley died on September 14th, and Roosevelt was sworn in at the Ansley Wilcox House. And the following month, Roosevelt invited Booker T. Washington to dinner at the White House. To his dismay, this sparked a bitter and at times vicious reaction across the heavily segregated South. Roosevelt reacted with astonishment and protest, saying that he looked forward to many future dinners with Washington. And upon further reflection, Roosevelt wanted to ensure that this had no effect on political support in the South, and further invitations to Washington were avoided. Roosevelt kept McKinley's cabinet and promised to continue McKinley's policies. In the November 1904 presidential election, Roosevelt won the presidency in his own right in a landslide victory against Alton Brooks Parker. His vice president was Charles Warren Fairbanks of Indiana. Of his domestic policies, one of Roosevelt's first notable acts as president was to deliver a 20,000-word address to Congress asking it to curb the power of large corporations called trusts. He also spoke in support of organized labor to further chagrin big business, but to their delight he endorsed the gold standard, protective tariffs, and lower taxes. For his aggressive use of the United States antitrust law, he became known as the Trust Buster. He brought 40 antitrust suits and broke up major companies such as the largest railroad and Standard Oil, the largest oil company. And then in May 1902, anthracite coal miners went on strike, threatening a national energy shortage. And after threatening the coal operators with intervention by federal troops, Roosevelt won their agreement to an arbitration of the dispute by a commission, which succeeded in stopping the strike, dropping coal prices, and retiring furnaces. The accord with J.P. Morgan resulted in the workers getting more pay for fewer hours, but with no union recognition. Journalist Ray Baker quoted Roosevelt concerning his policy towards capitalists and laborers, and my action on labor should always be considered in connection with my action as regards capital, and both are reducible to my favorite formula, a square deal for every man. And Roosevelt thought it was particularly important for the government to supervise the workings of the railway to avoid corruption in interstate commerce, and the result was the Hepburn Bill, which established control over railroad rates. Keep in mind, at this point, America, the United States, depended on coal for heating, and they depended on the railway for transportation. And so these were two important issues at that time. Roosevelt responded to public anger over the abuses in the food packing industry by pushing Congress to pass the Meat Legislation Act of 1906 and the Pure Food and Drug Act. The Meat Inspection Act of 1906 banned misleading labels and preservatives that contained harmful chemicals. And the Pure Food and Drug Act banned food and drugs that were impure or falsely labeled from being made, sold, and shipped. Roosevelt also served as honorary president of the American School Hygiene Association from 1907 to 1908, and in 1909 he convened the first White House Conference on the Care of Dependent Children. During the Panic of 1907, nearly all agreed that a more flexible system to ensure liquidity was needed, and the Republicans sought a response to the money supply through the bankers, whereas the Democrats sought government control. Roosevelt was unsure, but leaned towards the Republican view while continuing to denounce corporate corruption. Nevertheless, in 1910, Roosevelt commented on enormously wealthy and economically powerful men and suggested a graduated inheritance tax on big fortunes, increasing rapidity in amount with the size of the estate. Roosevelt was inclined to extend the regulatory reach of his office, and in a moment of frustration, House Speaker Joseph Gurney Cannon commented on Roosevelt's desire for executive branch control in domestic policymaking. That fellow at the other end of the avenue wants everything from the birth of Christ to the death of the devil. Biographer Brands states that even his friends occasionally wondered whether there was any custom or practice to mine or for him to try to regulate, update, or otherwise improve. In fact, Roosevelt's willingness to exercise his power included attempted rule changes in the game of football. At the Naval Academy, he sought to force retention of martial arts classes and to revise disciplinary rules. He even ordered changes made in the minting of a coin whose design he disliked, and ordered the government printing office to adopt simplified spellings for a core list of 300 words, according to reformers on the Simplified Spelling Board. He was forced to rescind the latter after substantial ridicule from the press and the resolution of protests from the House of Representatives. President Roosevelt had planned on running again in the 1920 election, but his health, as I believe I stated earlier, declined rapidly, and he passed away in 1919 before the election year. So this is not meant to be a concise overview of the 26th president's life, but it is meant to just give a show of what he was like, and what you can find out by enjoying the collecting of postage stamps. A lot of history in the few stamps that I've shown you here today from my personal collection. Thanks for taking a listen.